Gorg was a pit fighter upon the imperial hive world of Necromunda who was responsible for the single largest slave uprising to take place upon the world since the rise of House Goliath. Gorg was commonly regarded by many as being the single largest and strongest non-app-human pit fighter in Necromundan history, with his size and girth being so immense that he required the use of a hoist to lift him in and out of the fighting pits. In addition, shortly after beginning his life as a pit fighter, Gorg's master, a cruel and unscrupulous member of the Merchants Guild named Anano, would have both of the man's hands amputated and replaced with a pair of massive chain blades. These chain blades, in conjunction with his immense strength and sheer resilience, would allow Gorg to butcher his way through a variety of different foes, claiming victory after victory within the gladiatorial arena and earning Anano a small fortune in the process. Despite the vast amount of credits that Anano had amassed, the Guilder had no desire to utilize his earnings to improve the lives of his various pit slaves, instead having them live within the most squalid of conditions. Gorg was the sole exception in this regard, as the pit fighter had become Anano's main source of income, and thus the Guilder was more than willing to spend his own money in ensuring that his biggest draw was comfortable, as well as keeping the massive slave content with the promise of his eventual freedom, even though Anano had no intention of honouring such notions. The Guilder's miserly attitude, however, would come back to haunt him, following a fight involving another member of his slave stable. A female pit fighter named Hort would be pitted against a wild Scaly, a monstrous strain of abhuman that is native to the Necromundan underhives. Despite sustaining a number of injuries during the bout, Hort would achieve victory against her opponent and earn Anano his prize money. However, because Hort was regarded by her owner as being a lesser slave, the Guilder refused to send for a surgeon to treat her wounds, unwilling to expend the funds on such an inconsequential fighter. Approximately 3 days later, Hort would die from her wounds, despite many believing that her injuries were nowhere close to being fatal. Because of this, some believe that Anano had deliberately let Hort succumb to her injuries or had otherwise orchestrated her death, for it was well known that, despite being Anano's property, Hort would regularly mock the Guilder for his various deformities, such as his crooked back and misshapen face. Disgusted by his master's actions, Gorg would become enraged, instigating a full-scale rebellion against the Merchants Guild, freeing hundreds of other slaves in the process. Gorg's new army would then flee into the wastes, destroying a number of Guilder outposts, such as the trading post of Dust Falls, before laying siege to the settlement of Dead End Pass, a city that lay within a strategically important choke point within the underhives of Hive Primus, which boasted high walls and strong defences. Despite the stiff resistance demonstrated by the local populace, Gorg's army would eventually succeed in capturing Dead End Pass, with the gladiator becoming the settlement's new de facto mayor. While Gorg himself harboured a fearsome reputation, he would, much to the surprise of the locals, run the settlement with both wisdom and compassion, utilising the tolls earned from travellers and convoys to improve the lives of his new constituents, such as by strengthening the city's defences, building additional water stills and better housing, as well as completely abolishing the act of slavery within the city limits, ensuring that any slave caravans that passed through the city would be freed. Over the next several months, Dead End Pass would grow to be so prosperous that even the Guilders were reluctantly forced to do business with Gorg and his followers. Despite this, the Guilders themselves desired to enact their revenge against the pit fighter, for he had not only defied them, but embarrassed them, and feared that Gorg's actions would only inspire others to challenge the authority of the guilds. To this end, the Guilders would amass an army of outlaws and cutthroats who, with the aid of a traitor within its walls, would gain entry to Dead End Pass as its citizens slumbered, running amok as they began looting and killing indiscriminately. Despite making a heroic last stand, Gorg would be taken prisoner by the Guilders' army, and those pit slaves that fought alongside him would be unceremoniously executed. Gorg would then be paraded throughout a number of settlements, chained and muzzled like a wild dog for over a month, before finally being executed within the newly rebuilt Dust Falls, with his head being impaled upon the town's gate as a warning to others. And yet, despite his apparent death, rumours abound that Gorg's execution was staged by the Guilders, and that in truth, the pit fighter managed to escape into the depths of the underhive, where he intends to rebuild his army and retake Dead End Pass from the Guilders. So what could have truly happened to Gorg? The first possibility is that Gorg had indeed been captured and executed by the Guilders. Given the fact that Gorg had supposedly been paraded around various settlements for several weeks before his eventual execution in Dust Falls, this would suggest, at least initially, that there must have been a substantial number of eyewitnesses who could indeed confirm that the pit fighter was within Guilder custody. After all, Gorg was by no means an average-looking individual, for as mentioned earlier, the man was not only noted for his sheer size, both in height and girth, but for the massive chain blades that had replaced his hands, giving the pit fighter a distinctive appearance that would make him instantly recognizable to most, if not all underhivers who were even mildly aware of Gorg's reputation. As such, the various rumours regarding Gorg's continued survival could be little more than stories that were designed to inflate the very legend and aura of mystique surrounding the pit fighter, ensuring that the denizens of the Underhive remember that one man was able to humble the all-powerful Merchants Guild. However, given that all of Gorg's closest allies, as well as the majority of settlers within Dead End Pass, were slain by the Guilder's army of miscreants, then all we truly have is the word of the Guilders themselves as to whether or not they had indeed executed the right man. This then leads to the second possibility regarding the fate of Gorg, that he did in fact manage to escape Guilder custody and stalks the depths of the Underhive even to this day. The main piece of supporting evidence in this regard is with how the Guilders themselves react to such rumours and hearsay. As detailed within the book Outlanders, should the Guilders overhear anyone discussing the various rumours surrounding Gorg, then such individuals will either mysteriously disappear or otherwise experience fatal accidents. Because the Merchants Guild appears to be intent on keeping all information regarding Gorg's supposed survival suppressed, this would certainly appear to support the possibility that Gorg is indeed still alive. After all, if the Guilders had truly succeeded in executing Gorg, then why would they go to such efforts to prevent such inconsequential rumours from being spread unless they contained a kernel of truth? If Gorg had indeed met his end at the hands of the Guilders, then going to such efforts to eliminate those who are telling little more than folktales would appear to be nothing more than a waste of time, effort, and resources. But given that the Merchants Guild is willing to go to such lengths to suppress the spread of such information, this would suggest that the Guilders are themselves attempting to hide the truth regarding the pit fighter's fate. As such, it seems fairly reasonable to assume that Gorg did in fact somehow manage to avoid death. Perhaps the pit fighter was indeed captured and paraded around various settlements throughout the Underhive, only to escape his captors mere minutes, hours, or perhaps even days prior to his execution, forcing the Merchants Guild to execute a similar looking proxy in a desperate attempt to save face. If this were indeed the case, then Gorg could have either overpowered his captors as they prepared him for execution, or perhaps he had escaped with the aid of someone employed by the Guilders who had become sympathetic to the pit fighter's plight. In either case, should Gorg still be alive, then the pit fighter would more than likely attempt to lay low for a number of weeks, months, or possibly even years, secluding himself within the Underhive, battling the various horrors that dwell within its depths in an attempt to avoid Guilder retribution. Not only this, but Gorg could also potentially be attempting to raise another army of former slaves, even if this meant assaulting slave caravans single-handedly. After all, Gorg is himself famed for his strength, resilience, and sheer killing power, meaning that it is certainly within the realm of possibility for the pit fighter to leave no survivors to report his actions to the Guilders should he decide to begin waging a guerrilla war against the Merchants Guild. Alternatively, perhaps Gorg had managed to find a way to make it off of Necromunda itself, either by stowing away within a cargo container destined to be shipped off-world, or perhaps the pit fighter managed to find himself recruited into an Inquisitor's retinue. This latter possibility, while admittedly having a fairly slim chance to occur, is not entirely outside the realm of possibility, as members of the Imperial Inquisition have been known to regularly visit the world. The most notable example in this regard is that of Inquisitor Jenna Horaciel of the Ordo Xenos, who for a time would operate upon Necromunda, taking the name of Helena Jericho in order to hide her true identity. During the course of her prolonged undercover operation, Jenna will be made pregnant by Lord Gerontius Helmore, the world's planetary governor, eventually giving birth to a son who would grow to become the legendary bounty hunter, Cal Jericho. As such, it's not entirely unreasonable to assume that another Inquisitor could have, at some point in time, made planetfall upon Necromunda, before eventually recruiting Gorg into their retinue. Perhaps the truth is a combination of these previously mentioned hypotheses. Perhaps Gorg was indeed captured by the Merchants Guild and sentenced to death, only for an agent of the Inquisition to intervene. The Inquisition could have then spirited Gorg away, instructing the Merchants Guild to keep such information secret for one reason or another, forcing the Guilders to execute a substitute slave that had been altered to more closely resemble the Pit Fighter in an attempt to cover up his sudden disappearance. Regardless as to what fate truly befell Gorg, his legend will no doubt be remembered for generations to come. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.